Well, welcome. Thank you very much for spending a little bit of your afternoon with us. We know you're busy.
Well, thank you.
And I'm going to take off with the first question. What do you think the city's roles and responsibilities should be regarding the creation and maintenance of our economic community?
I think city government has a really crucial role in the local economy and in building towards the future of the economy here. And that touches land use planning, resources such as water, traffic planning, public works, and I think also helping create an atmosphere in which the community understands how the economy affects us all, and maybe even sort of educating as to why decisions are made the way they are. I think a lot of times we run into problems in Santa Cruz because, not to be too critical of any particular people, but sometimes something I would regard as sort of misleadership, where there's an assumption by those in office or those in high staff positions assume that they're the good guys, and that if they just advocate for something, then the people will come along, and they don't do the job of explaining why something's important to the economy or to the quality of life here. And so that's a real important piece of why I want to be on the council, is to make sure that the community understands policy decisions rather than feeling that they're just being forced on them. I think the city government plays, and the city council in particular, plays a very crucial role in creating the atmosphere for the kind of economic development that people can accept here.
Do you see there ways that the council can be more proactive in creating that policy that would be helpful to economic development?
A concern of mine is that we switch our focus from just growth numbers or even tax revenues to say what is the quality of the economic development we want. And so I advocate something in this campaign I'm calling shared prosperity, which is to say it shouldn't just be, our success shouldn't just be measured by the overall numbers, but are people in the community broadly benefiting from the economic development? And that means better wages. I think approving more minimum wage jobs, for example, would be bad policy. That means people who are bearing the burden of the growth are having to work 2 or 3 jobs just to pay the rent and feed their kids. And if a crisis hits, it means they're going to fall back on the need for city or county services. And so that's not, doesn't make good fiscal sense to me in the big picture. So I want the city to play a role in planning and approving economic development projects that broadly share the prosperity they generate. So that's a high-level abstract answer to your question. I think there are issues about land use and zoning, for example, that the city has a big role in, and that we could be with leadership that takes the community into account. We could be doing a lot more for creating places where intensification economically could happen. And you know, one of my favorites is the river. To me, the river is a back alley when it should be the centerpiece of Santa Cruz. And that's not just about beauty or recreation, it's about the habitat, and it's, to me, very essentially about economic development. The river could be, if we brought it back and did all those things, safety, beauty, habitat, recreation, and then thought of it as an asset for economic development, I think there's potential for commercial uses near the river that use the river as a feature, as well as some intensified housing and things like that. So to me, it's kind of a big underutilized space right in the center of town, which is where the transportation is good, where the services are there, and where lots of people are already. So it's not sprawl out into the greenbelt or something like that. It's the appropriate place to put it. So that's one of my biggest motivations to run for city council, is I want to push the river forward in all those different dimensions that I mentioned.
Let me ask you a question about the minimum wage.
Mm-hmm.
A few years ago, 4 years ago actually, there was a minimum wage ordinance that was defeated.
8 years, yeah.
Was it 8 years?
Yeah, 2006, yeah.
Wow. It just seemed like yesterday. It was not successful, and in fact it was decisively beaten in the election. And I know you favor better paying jobs. Yeah. I certainly understand that, so do I. But what I'm curious is, would you be supportive of another opportunity to set a different minimum wage in the city of Santa Cruz than in surrounding areas?
Well, there is a drive all over the country now for local minimum wage, and to me that's because of the abdication of the federal government and their responsibility for that. And a big concern of mine is that, you know, in 2006, that proposal was for a minimum wage of $9.25 an hour, and the recent economic data I've seen is that the minimum living wage in Santa Cruz to meet your rent and everything is about $18 an hour, so that's twice that. So it is a big concern of mine, but I recognize, I think one of the problems with that proposal 8 years ago was that it was seen as a little island of a higher minimum wage in a surrounding region that didn't have it, and that could cause some economic disparity and some things like that. And so I would rather put pressure on the state and the federal government to come up with a uniform minimum wage. I think that's better for everybody. But you know, I will say that I know this from walking door to door, that people are saying, what about San Francisco, what about Seattle, what about San Jose, what about Los Angeles? They all have local minimum wages. Berkeley, yeah. And places in Florida, Baltimore, all over the country. It's a local movement, but again, I see that local movement coming because unfortunately our Congress is so stalemated that they're not doing their job. So I would rather put pressure that way and have it be something that any business or any investor, regardless of which side of a city line they're on, you know, knows what to expect. But I will be, I mean, just to be fully disclosing, if people of Santa Cruz start organizing for minimum wage, they have some sympathy from me, even if I think really the responsibility is at a higher level than the local level.
Okay. Appreciate the honesty and the approach. Let me, about the river and economic development. For the river to become a centerpiece here would be a significant change in all kinds of behavior.
Yep.
How do you think that the initial project that changed that attitude, what would that project look like?
Well, I've been working on the river for about 40 years, and I figure I have a couple more decades to put in on it. So I've kind of had to, and it sometimes has moved so slowly that I've had to adopt to patience as a major feature of working on the river. And so I don't really at this point expect a big dramatic change all at once, but the pieces of it would be further activation of the river as a positive social space, which right now means more recreation, more interpretive programs, better signage, things that just get more people down there that are not being antisocial, and sort of make the space the way we've tried to do with the downtown with some success, maybe not as much as everybody wants, to have the space more dominated by the positive activities as opposed to the negative ones, and kind of crowd out the negative stuff. That would be part of it. I think the more that everyone understands the natural features and habitat value as something to come and observe and take care of and have a stewardship attitude towards, that also creates a social atmosphere that then discourages the antisocial behavior. And so that's another piece of it. There's a fabulous new river art project that's just gotten underway that's going to appear next spring. I went to one of the planning meetings a couple weeks ago, and one of the all-time heroes of Santa Cruz, Kathleen Fraschetti, the art teacher, is involved in that, so I have a lot of faith that it's going to be a good thing. And so things like that, public art and public events, are another piece of what I think is going to do it. But then, you know, I think it's time, and again, this is one of the reasons I'm running now, is I think we need a project that might be some commercial or combined commercial and residential that's near the river, that expects to treat a revived river as an asset and kind of ticks things off and gets it going. And you know, I would like to lead a tour of architects and urban planners and owners and businesses along the river, and I've got about 10 places I'd like to point to and say, see that could be something much better economically, socially, and even environmentally. I don't see those things as contradictory. Mm-hmm. And there probably won't be time for that in the few weeks remaining before the election, but that will be one of my intentions. So again, I couldn't say one specific thing is going to tip it into a completely positive thing. I think it's a whole set of measures, but that's what I want to add some momentum to.
Do you see the city as having a role, an active role in making such a project happen?
Oh, absolutely. I think the city has to. I mean, you know, we have I took part in 4 different task forces that came up with plans or pushed plans forward for the river since the early '80s, and some of those plans have just kind of sat on the shelf without a lot of action. Some of them take money, so that's an issue. And you know, we actually had set up a financing district for the river improvements in early 1989, and guess what happened in late 1989, which is the 25th anniversary of the earthquake this year. And so that financing district had to be reassigned to rebuild the downtown, which was totally appropriate. And that was, again, the city creating a mechanism for some improvements that would be partly public and partly private. And so I think time to get back on that track. And so I see planning policies, working out ways to assist with long-term financing, and possibly even some public projects that are directly public that help tip the thing forward and get the ball rolling.
Are there other areas that you think the city should be focusing its infrastructure dollars on aside from the river that will help drive economic development? Or not just development, but keeping people from constantly commuting over the hill for the jobs?
Well, we have a number of areas that are mostly kind of commercial or office areas, and they're usually, the ones that I think we should be reinforcing are on the transportation corridor. So there's parts of the east side along, especially on Soquel Avenue and parts of Water Street, Mission Street, although that's heavily burdened by being the highway also, and so there are some constraints on how you create a business district out of a highway, you know, even though it is in the center, in the middle of town. So I think focusing on those areas so the transportation is there and the expectation that they're gonna, that it's not economic development that's being foisted onto, it's gonna eliminate a residential neighborhood or really impact somebody's quality of life by being built there, which could happen if it were out on the west side or parts of the east side. So in the commercial corridors, I can see the city encouraging stuff like that. Now, we don't have the tool of redevelopment anymore, which, you know, where the city could create a district and set up a long-term financing mechanism. And so how exactly we do that, other than persuasion or maybe some land use decisions, I would want to investigate further. Does that answer your question?
Should we move on to housing?
Yeah. This segues naturally from what you've just been talking about. We have the economic community, the business community has a tremendous need for affordable housing. Most of our workforces cannot live in the city of Santa Cruz,
right,
and have to come from an ever farther away place. I was recently told that that Hollister was one of those places that people are coming from. Such a commute in Los Angeles would be ordinary, but here it's just absolutely mind-boggling. It's extraordinary. But it does underscore the seriousness of the affordable housing issue in our community. I'd like to know how you see that problem. How would you describe it? And then, as a council person, what approaches you might take to address that need?
Mm-hmm. Well, affordable housing is a really important thing that the city ought to take on more than, and you know, in the past the city actually has done a tremendous amount. I helped build a few hundred units of affordable housing after the earthquake. I was a project manager on several, including downtown, mixed commercial and residential, one in the beach area, and several others out in the neighborhoods. And it's very hard to do. It's hard to make truly affordable housing, especially given our wage levels here. Not to harp on that too much.
That's number two.
It's a challenge to do it without subsidies, and a lot of the old subsidies are gone. But it should be a priority, and I'd like to see the city get back to where they have a more dedicated staff just working on that question. To me, again, done appropriately, done so that neighbors don't feel it's being done to them, but rather with their help, I think we could get some higher densities in some area, which helps cut the costs of the development. You know, I have, just to say a little bit more on the done to versus done with, I would like to see us have city policies in which if the people that live, say, on a couple blocks in a neighborhood got together and said, if we work together, we can plan for some public benefits such as affordable housing, water conservation, energy conservation in our little area, if they would do that and genuinely come up with ways to add some more units that they help plan and therefore they can accept, that wouldn't have been there otherwise, then I would say the city ought to give them additional planning powers for their neighborhood and possibly even do what some cities do, which is, I've been told that Monterey, they take part of their hotel tax and distribute it to the neighborhoods, so the neighbors get to decide how to use some public money for public improvements in their area. So again, to me, there could be this interesting deal that the city sets up to make with neighborhoods to intensify their housing, their affordable housing, and some other public benefits, but have it more under their own control so that it fits what they aspire to for the quality of life in their neighborhoods. So I think we could actually, not just in apartment buildings in the more intensified areas, but even out in the neighborhoods, get some more acceptable or accepted intensification and affordability, and not have these big wars that we're used to over development. So I want to promote that kind of approach, and that's a very sketchy description of what this idea is, but that's something I'll be interested in developing further if I can.
It's intriguing.
Using that as your model, we have certainly our general plan, our accessory plan, a lot of these plans that provide for denser housing along the transit corridors, but yet there are neighborhoods right behind those transit corridors, and neighborhoods are very well established. How do you see working with those neighbors when you already have a plan? You may have a developer coming in and saying, I'd like to put some affordable housing here, and certainly that's going to impact their quality of life.
Well, to me, the key to this, and I've seen it work, so this isn't just a kind of an idea, is the sooner that the city and those prospective developers or the owners go to the neighbors and say, we're interested in doing something here, could you be involved in helping us make it come out really good? The sooner that happens, the better the prospects are that it will be good and it will be approved. And this may be a sore point to some, but some friends of mine who were in the leadership of the city council several years ago, I think made a big mistake with the Coast Hotel, which is that they had a new owner of that hotel that they said, hey, maybe rather than just a few improvements, why don't you think big? Why don't you go for a new parking structure and more rooms in the hotel and some things like that? We'll get it approved for you. What they should have done is gone straight to the neighborhoods around there and the people of Santa Cruz and said, look at the prospect. We have a new owner here. If we all get together and think this through, we might get a bigger investment than that owner was expecting to make and improve our tourist sector and get some improvements that benefit the neighborhood. So it really is a matter of what order you do things in, and maybe a little bit about having leadership not be so arrogant that they think they are going to deliver something just because they got elected once before. I'm not talking about you, Hillary. I'm talking about some people
Before
that
my time.
Friends of mine, yes, before your time, and friends of mine that I respect, but I think they goofed there. I think they assumed that they could bring the people along when in fact what they should have done is go to the people and say, help us make this a good project. And I believe strongly in that. I have a lot of trust for people actually making good decisions when they're respected and included in the decision making.
The conversation that has been coming up ever since I got on council was around the rental inspection ordinance, and now that's certainly a large discussion going on around accessory dwelling units. How do you feel about that ordinance that was before my time and after your time that was approved? And then additionally, where do you think council and the city should go with our accessory dwelling units, and especially in light of the fact that we have a housing crisis?
So to me, those are two separate questions that are very entangled right now. So on the rental inspection ordinance, I have some reservations about it. It does feel very intrusive to a lot of people, both owners and tenants. And I'm a tenant myself, and I've been a tenant advocate over the years. And I certainly don't want an action by the city like that to lead to housing units being taken off the market. I think we just can't afford that right now, to lose housing units. And so what I would like to see in the rental inspection ordinance is, if it continues, I want to see a few things. I want to see the city, it's again, this is a question of a public good or a public benefit. If the city strongly wants housing units upgraded, and there's certainly good reasons for that, both for the tenant's sake as well as for general health and safety, fire prevention, and things like that, then I think the city should be prepared to help when that is a hard thing to do. That is, if an owner can't afford right away to upgrade part of, one of their housing units, that then the city ought to find a way to help them over a long-term finance that, or give them a time period in which they can do it rather than shutting them down right away because they're not up to code. So I would like to see the rental inspection ordinance adjusted, and I know there's some planning commission recommendations coming to the council soon. I haven't totally studied all those, and I'm not sure I'm going to be completely satisfied with those. I hope to get better informed and in on the discussion next month when that comes back. So the ordinance right now feels intrusive to a lot of people. It's a burden, and it is rather drastic when units are found that are not readily brought up to code. And that drasticness means we lose housing, and that's a problem. I don't think we should take any housing off the market right now. So that's the rental ordinance. Accessory dwelling units, Santa Cruz has been on a process for about 15 years of loosening up our restrictions on accessory dwelling units, and in general, I think that's progress. I think allowing people to get better housing use out of an old shack or garage, assuming that it is, safe and healthy and has plumbing and things like that, so that someone can actually live in it in a decent manner. I had some resistance to that when it was first proposed years ago, because it seemed as though it was contrary to another big trend in Santa Cruz, which is to protect our neighborhoods from being overloaded. Right. Too many cars, too much traffic, too many people per lot, and so on. And that certainly is a big issue in some neighborhoods, as I'm sure you hear at times on the council. And so I think we need to be careful and thoughtful about the accessory dwelling units. I continue to support the idea that an owner of the place where that is ought to be living on site. I'm willing to loosen that up as far as it being a family member of the owner. I worry that if there's no on-site ownership requirement in the accessory unit or in the main house, that kind of opens it up for exploitation by a whole lot of housing, when people were foreclosed on in the crisis several years ago, got bought up by outside investors, and I don't think they give a damn about Santa Cruz and what happens to our housing market here. And I don't have a lot of trust for what they would do if that thing were completely broken open as far as the owner on-site requirement. I know there's people advocating to get rid of that right now, and the council will have to face that soon. But I think having the owner there is better, both because they're going to care for it, their relationship with the person renting the other part is more personal, and the potential for exploitation by basically, I don't know how to say this any other way, greedy investors, is too high. In the long run, the unforeseen consequences would be bad for the community. I do have some reservations about the rental inspection ordinance. I think it could be improved as opposed to abolished, and I know there's people pushing to just completely get rid of it. I think that if we got rid of the rental inspection ordinance, then I think we need something that helps renters have the ability to feel safe in dealing with issues about health and safety in the units they own. We used to have a rental information and mediation service, for example, in Santa Cruz, and so they could help a tenant if they were somewhat fearful of confronting maybe the owner about a needed improvement. The rental information and mediation service could remind both of their rights, both parties of their rights and responsibilities, and help them negotiate if necessary. And so if the rental inspection ordinance is just repealed, I think we need something else to tip the balance a little bit more towards the interests in protecting tenants. If it's kept, it should be modified. And then accessory dwelling units, I think, with continued thoughtful improvement of that, and maybe some loosening of the setback requirements and some things like that, I think it's a good thing to keep working on.
All right, moving on to our final question. Our two largest industries are higher education and its research and tourism. What are the city's most important issues regarding these industries, and what would you do about them? The university, what I really strongly support is ways the city and the university can work together to turn all that great thinking and creativity into locally based
entrepreneurial opportunities. And so that means jobs, that means people that get a great idea actually find fertile ground here locally to turn that into a company or something like that. I love that idea. I'm in the tech industry myself. Between election seasons, I'm a software developer, and I know what it's like to have a supportive community around, or to not have it. And so I think this is part of the future of Santa Cruz, is to nurture that as much as possible. And the potential for partnerships with the university is huge. Their work in computer science and genomics, in biological sciences, engineering, all that stuff some of it's for science, and that's really important just on its own for our knowledge, but an awful lot of it has practical applications that could turn into exciting businesses or services or products, and I'd like to see the city plan on that. At the same time, even the organic farming side of this university campus is something that we could be doing more to make this more of a center for that, where the city, even though we don't have a lot of our own ag land, we could be promoting that as making this area even more of a center for innovations in agriculture. And so I'd like to see the city continue to work on that.
Let me, if I can,
Yeah.
because before you transition out of that,
Yeah.
is what role do you see the city playing? Obviously, the city would love to benefit by development of intellectual property created at the university. Exactly what do you see as the city role in making that happen? What would be the first step, for instance? What would you think that community needs in order to be accepted of the city's approach?
Well, this is an area where, on the assumption that what's being created are going to be locally, businesses that are located here, and the chance to hire local people and turn local talent loose to do creative things and turn those into businesses, then I think that's a tremendous thing that the city ought to then kick in with. I'd like to see some kind of a local economic development trust fund that maybe even has seed money, or that provides some backup for angel investors to come in, or venture capitalists, and to say, our city's on your side if you want to make investments here. And I don't know what the particulars would be, but to actually get involved in the financial side. The city doesn't have huge resources, but it does have a good credit rating, and it has the ability to give assurances to outside investors or to local investors that want to know that something has a chance of surviving here, that the city is welcoming to it. So it's sort of atmosphere in some ways, as well as possibly particular financial instruments that we might get created and develop. So that would be one thing. I think there are innovation centers that some communities have, the city has an economic development staff who are pretty talented, and I'd like to see them continue to be supported. And I guess the other thing would be, I would want to go to some of the people with entrepreneurial ideas, some of the potential investors, some of the faculty that are helping develop these ideas in young people's minds, and say to them, what would be the best thing for the city to do? What's the missing piece that our local government, with its limited but real resources and ways of supporting things, what could we do? Again, I wouldn't want the city just to go off and do something without, just, okay, I have a good idea, but rather to do it in discussion and consideration of what the other players would want and need. And I'd like to see us do more of that.
Very good.
Let me touch on the tourism piece.
Oh, yes, right. To me, the challenge of tourism as an industry is that it is based on jobs that are not very well paying. And there's a huge number of people who work in hotel and restaurant and other tourism-oriented jobs who have a hard time, have to work 2 or 3 jobs at once just to survive, or have to drive a long way, or both. So that's an aspect that I can't say I just want more of that industry if it's just more low-paying jobs. But at the same time, we live in such an incredibly beautiful area with the coast and the mountains and many parts of Santa Cruz that are utterly charming and beautiful compared to many small cities, and the river and its potential. So I think that developing our visitor industry as an attraction for the overnight visitors as well as the day visitors. I don't want to lose the day visitors. I think it's wonderful that we provide the beach and the boardwalk for people from Stockton who want relief from 110-degree heat, and they come here for the fog, amazingly enough to me. You know, I think, you know, that's, fine.
Those people do exist.
And that we're a surfing capital, and I think that's wonderful. And so that side of what we are as a visitor town is real important to me. But I think we could do more for the kind of multidimensional, hit the different types of visitor industry. So I would tend to be supportive as long as it isn't just creating more low-wage jobs. Again, would really want to know would want the city to know and hear from the people in that industry what makes a difference for them. Let me hit one side thing, which is water. One of the things that hit me one day was I saw the map of where the desalinated water would actually be distributed, and it was all along the coastline of Santa Cruz. That means a huge number of our restaurants, our hotels, and our visitor industry would be getting that desalinated water. And not to harp on desal, because you didn't ask me about that, but you know, I have to say, what would we do in a red tide? What would we do if the word got out that the water served in our restaurants tastes bad because it's desalinated? I don't think that helps our visitor industry. And so to me, the fact that we have really good tasting water compared to a lot of cities now, and that we're an environmentally oriented community that not only wants to take care of the natural systems here, but of our visitors by serving them healthy food and healthy water, that's important to me, and I think that's part of what we ought to be advertising for here. So I'd say working a little bit about...
So you worked into the desal?
Yeah, I did.
Is there any other water issue that's a non-starter for you?
You mean like type of water source?
Yes. Well, not type of source, because rainfall is what we're really talking about.
Yes.
But would the development of another storage facility similar to La Coloma be something that would be a non-starter for you?
No, I'm really open to that. Now, when I was on the council back in prehistoric times, we did look into some proposals. Yes, we looked into some proposals, and some of them turned out to not work out. But I think I've heard some interesting ideas more recently about a couple locations that actually I don't remember with us investigating before, and I'd like to look into that. Storage is a big piece of how a water system can work well, especially in the times, either drought or just the long seasons we have without much rainfall.
Yes.
The one way of, I would like to see in the really long run that we have, we find a good way to recycle our wastewater and use it more rather than just pushing it out to the ocean, both for the sake of the environment and also because there is potential there. However, right now I don't think we're quite ready for it for human consumption. That's to me has long-term potential. But I'm really looking forward to what the new committee comes up with for alternatives and their creativity. I think it's going to be real important for us.
I wanted to ask you one question, again, back to tourism.
Yeah.
And I love the detours, though, to water. There is currently in place a TOT hotel incentive program. Seems to be somewhat controversial, and I understand that you've been hearing that a lot during your tour of the community and forums. What's your attitude toward that? Is that the kind of thing the city should invest in? Or is that something better left to the market?
Well, I did hear one of the hotel developers say they really needed this subsidy because otherwise their financing wasn't going to pencil out. And that makes me go, wait a minute, isn't this a profitable industry? If it doesn't pencil out right now, how do we know they're not going to come back to the public trough, you know, in 5 years when they say, you know, our lodging ratio wasn't high enough and we're not quite making it and we need more subsidy. So I have some question about if they're saying it depends on getting that subsidy to build it, then, you know, well, maybe the market is actually telling us something about the viability of that. So that is a concern. At the same time, I also feel that the city has so little ability to generate the revenue we need for the public services we provide. We don't have the property tax as a serious source of revenue anymore. Sales tax requires adding more retail development, which is a challenge to do. And so the transient occupancy tax, the hotel tax, is one of the other sources. And so I don't want to just start handing that out to to just go back to the visitor industry. I think there's a lot of other city services that could use that money. At the same time, having said those qualifications, churning some of the money back into the industry it came from so that industry is stronger is a good idea. So I didn't like the quote-unquote $2 million giveaway that the council has moved towards, but I do think that reinvestment of some of that revenue in making the right kind of improvements to the visitor industry is a good idea. So that's I'm sort of all over the place on that.
No, that's, I hear that.
Yeah.
But, you know, I hadn't heard that term, the $2 million giveaway. Have we actually given someone $2 million?
Well, I think that's a newspaper phrase. I think that the promise is that if future hotels are developed, then the additional revenue, some of it would be kicked back to them. I don't mean kickbacks, but I mean, you know, would be fed back to them to help with their financing. And somewhere along the line, somebody said that will add up to $2 million, either for some particular project or for the total in some period of time. So yeah, that isn't my number. That's the number that's out there in the neighborhoods, though.
If I could go back to the education question for a moment, and stop the newspaper talk. The university's charge is to really educate as many students as possible. And we've touched a little bit on the water issue and some really positive things that are going on in the university. What's your opinion on university growth going forward? Because certainly there's plans for North Campus development. That's not just a growth issue, but a water issue, neighborhood issue, a myriad of issues. Where do you stand on that?
I have a lot of reservations about the development of the upper campus for environmental reasons, for water consumption, and for the traffic burden on the town, because there aren't that many ways to get there, Western Drive and High Street, basically. In addition, I have a real beef with the way the university provides housing. Their housing is so expensive, and that's one of the reasons that a lot of us, including myself, as tenants in town, are experiencing so much pressure on rents. And I know that it's a University of California system-wide problem, how they finance housing and how they charge for it. And if I get elected, I'm going to try to push back on that, because I think what they charge to live on the UCSC campus is not appropriate for the rental market in Santa Cruz. And so if they're going to develop more housing or more campus development with more people and keep their housing rates as high as they are, that overweighs a lot of the other benefits that would come from that expansion. So the university is an incredible asset for Santa Cruz and ought to be, I'd like improvement in some of the areas where its impacts are still pretty severe on the neighborhoods or on the fiscal situation here. So it's a very mixed thing for me. I'd be happy to say more if the time arises.
Bruce, thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
Appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you. Appreciate your time.
All right.